The problem of Theodicy, reconciling absolute good and absolute evil. The problem of Theodicy concerns the question of why God, who in theological belief is regarded as absolutely good, allows evil to exist. The Church Fathers of the Catholic Church, as well as many philosophers, have attempted to understand how the relationship between absolute good and absolute evil can exist within the same world created by the highest good, namely God. They sought to justify it, to understand its purpose, its role in relation to good, whether evil is merely an absence of good, an opposing force, a complement, or even an extension. Consensus was never truly reached on where, how, or with what justification absolute evil could be incorporated into creation alongside good. This problem remains unresolved in the world of religion today. Scholars still debate which perspective should be considered the correct one. One thing has always been certain: evil has always existed and will almost certainly continue to exist. What has never been known, and still isn't, is whether evil should be regarded as part of good, as an independent law, as dependent on good, or in what other relation it must stand to good, not only in terms of its origin, but also regarding its existence and its ongoing nature for all remaining future time. These questions were important in the past, remain significant today, and will continue to shape how the concept of the good God is understood in religions for all eternity. How good is conceptualized in contrast to evil will even determine how humanity can perceive and engage with God or the absolute good. Evil is not something foreign or alien, it is a reality with which we must constantly contend, aligning our thoughts and actions toward the highest good. Where, in our thinking, perception and consciousness, the highest good and the most perverse evil are positioned, this will profoundly affect whether and to what extent we ourselves can be good or evil, or should become so. Humans are always in search of a divine reflection within themselves, striving toward the absolute good in thought, speech and behavior. They wish not only to feel close to it, but to embody it, to manifest goodness within themselves, so that they may live according to this divine nature of good in the world, among people and within society. For this reason, the questions posed to the problem of Theodicy are fundamental and crucial, for they will determine whether we can develop a divine nature within ourselves as we move closer to good. The persistence of evil, reflections on the nature of good and Theodicy. If one were to define God as the absolute good being who allows no evil, one would inevitably have to ask why evil exists at all, given that it demonstrably shapes, to some degree or entirely, the lives of every human being. Whatever we do, we are condemned to strive to endure suffering and to transform the malevolent, flawed environment, which almost never mirrors the ideal within us, into good through our own labor, thought and willpower. If we fail to do this, we are lost. We might starve or die of thirst, or succumb to disease or other misfortunes. Wherever humans exist, they must constantly reshape their surroundings to the best of their knowledge and conscience, effecting transformation in the world both spiritually and materially. The moment we deviate from this duty or allow ourselves to remain inactive for extended periods, our decline in the material world begins. This insight is often so far removed from what philosophers and church teachers have provided as guidance on the reality of Theodicy that it is almost unbelievable. It has always been the endeavor of thoughtful minds to reconcile this tension between the practice and theory of Theodicy in such a way that all contradictions, inconsistencies and opposing forces are resolved, replaced or harmonized, so that the omnipotence of good ultimately triumphs and evil vanishes forever from the created worlds. Yet, as we observe and experience, even within this framework of creation, evil does not disappear from all worlds. It remains as strong as ever, returning repeatedly, almost predictably, to the worlds of existence. It is precisely for this reason that many thoughtful individuals still struggle to understand how good can be conceived, and how the evil that necessarily arises through good is situated, whether it is merely an absence of good, whether it possesses an independent presence or form, or whether it operates with its own dynamics and a willful essence. The question of how evil should be understood, where it should be placed, and, above all, what dependencies or relationships it has with good, remain unresolved. Each of us must continuously confront these questions for ourselves, in order to develop a personal, reasoned understanding of the relationship between good and evil. Faith, free will, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. No matter how individual believers resolve the problem of theodicy, it inevitably gives rise to important personal questions. These include whether acts such as praying and petitioning, closely related as they are, can become a reality for us, or whether they are ultimately meaningless. All too often we find ourselves in external distress and despair, and the first and highest source of help in such moments is faith in the supreme goodness of God. From this faith we hope to derive, on a personal level, the assurance that this goodness has an obligation to assist us in the turmoil and confusion of the world or our own lives, as long as we think of it and believe in it. We thus place great expectations on the being presented to us as the highest good. It should solve all our problems. It should possess not only immense but superhuman and omnipotent powers, so that it can not only fight evil but undo it entirely. The stronger our belief in this absolute goodness of God, the greater our internal expectations of this connection become, as well as of our petitions, prayers, and requests for support. Yet even here, two attitudes exist. One assumes, with a certain expectation, that the desired result must necessarily follow, while the other expresses a prayer or petition in pure hope, fully aware that prayer alone is unlikely to change the reality of evil, and simultaneously seeks solution on the human level. This latter view is often supported by the common saying, "Help yourself and God will help you." It is a contradictory stance, for it attempts to effect change on the metaphysical level of the highest good because it is expected, while at the same time not relying on any law beyond natural laws to find a solution, consciously pursuing both avenues simultaneously. Whether this can still be called faith is debatable, as it often seems more a way to cover both spheres of problem solving, metaphysical and scientific, while increasing one's sense of security. Yet even this dual approach makes no difference. Whether divine assistance comes or not, the outcome are determined elsewhere, beyond human control. This means that despite various approaches to addressing the environment and its problems, belief often remains solely in the expected help, unless one engages with the authentic reality of evil, which has become real and will continue to be so. No matter how much one wishes to set it aside or hopes for a theoretical explanation, evil does not disappear. It persists and will continue to confront us repeatedly. Zoroastrianism, for example, sought to construct a worldview in which the realities of absolute good and absolute evil constantly collide across time and space, challenging one another not just conceptually, but seeking to neutralize the opposing force. This perspective holds that evil exists in anticipation of good, and that through the disappearance of evil, good arises, or conversely, the emergence or creation of good causes evil to vanish. Hence, this doctrine emphasizes that humans must choose how to employ their creative abilities, for good or for evil. The direction of the world toward transformation in the direction of good depends on this choice, not necessarily independent of divine influence, but heavily weighted by human initiative and effort. This is not merely a scientific consideration aimed at refuting God. The concept of the metaphysical absolute good gains significance through human willpower and talent, which decisively influence whether creative effort is applied for good or evil. Human action is deeply interwoven with reality, and within this framework, personal willpower is paramount. Without individual effort, application of knowledge and use of abilities, natural laws, which often manifest in harmful ways, cannot be overcome. Yet, this view does not entirely dismiss divine power, which expresses itself through the eternal dualism of good and evil. It follows that divine order necessarily includes evil, and God allows the opposing forces to contend eternally across infinite time and space. The victory and defeat of one or the other never remain permanent. Human will and creative contribution are essential to the success of either. Each person must ultimately decide what to support, what is worth promoting, and with what justification and consequences for themselves, those around them, and the world. This responsibility is profound and essential. It teaches humans to discern good from evil while actively participating in determining which side can prevail and for how long. Without human decision-making and influence, evil could easily dominate good for extended periods, or perhaps indefinitely, crushing hope for improvement. This perspective does not claim that God is the embodiment of good, but rather defines the meaning of the eternal struggle between good and evil, as God refrains from intervention after creation, allowing natural laws to unfold according to divine will. In this view, humans are granted the freedom to choose whether to act for good or for evil. It distinguishes between evil arising from the absence of good and the broader law-like alternation of good and evil. Humans must learn through their own actions to cultivate good within themselves and in their immediate surroundings. Christian teaching has historically incorporated elements of this dualism, transmitting knowledge, wisdom, and experience to nurture human values, virtues, and customs, embedding them in traditions and practices. Sacred texts accomplished this through metaphors, imagery, parables, narratives, laws, commandments, aphorisms, proverbs, prophetic messages, poetry, prayers, genealogies, rhetorical questions, dialogues, symbols, symbolic actions, visions, dreams, letters, liturgy, and historical accounts. Later, rituals completed the remaining aspects of these essential teachings, creating a cohesive system that endures as a lasting worldview and doctrine, offering guidance across all generations. Jesus Christ as the example of human suffering and fulfillment. What is even more important is the tradition of transmitting this knowledge through a human representative, one who embodied the experiences of humanity in such a way that most could relate and understand through his example. Jesus Christ became this sacred figure for all. Through his suffering and trials, he was not only like us, but experienced all these personal struggles himself, because he willed it so, and sacrificed himself for all who would follow him and his example. His story was no different from that of every human being, across all times, past and future. Life involves a period of growth, a time of reflection where one may feel as if trapped in a perpetual state, yet inevitably comes a phase of personal and spiritual decline, initiating a new cycle. All of this is in some way recorded in the eternal cycle of becoming, being, and passing away. Even Jesus Christ sought to live and learn from his self-created reality, not only to experience these things himself, but to serve as a guide for the many lost, joyless, and suffering people, so that they could orient themselves by his example. Each human life bears remarkable similarity, and by witnessing the end of Jesus' life, one can foresee and experience their own end vicariously, achieving personal completion and refinement. At this stage, it is no longer a matter of assuming a dualism of all worlds and realities, but rather of learning how to endure suffering, hardship, and worry through action or acceptance, and understanding that suffering will always remain part of our lives. One need not seek out suffering. It comes inevitably. The task is to learn to accept, bear, and endure it, for only in doing so one achieves wholeness and fulfillment. Jesus Christ understood that he could only serve humanity by walking the path of human suffering himself, demonstrating that no one can bypass this path, but that one can learn to endure it to achieve fulfillment. Completion and ultimate victory cannot be reached by skipping the end. Nothing is attained except through fulfillment itself, and all endeavors to live eternally or indefinitely are ultimately futile, for nothing in creation's fulfillment lasts forever except God himself. The only thing for humans that endures through time is the message of Jesus Christ's life and suffering, which provides a path and example for all to achieve fulfillment. One need not cling to material things, career, wealth, possessions, influence, or power. It is sufficient to understand that the path and its end are inevitable. Yet, during our lifetimes, through the teachings of Jesus Christ, we have the opportunity to transform the world into a paradise. Once this time passes, so too does our potential. This is the teaching of Jesus Christ, who died to give us a living example of what our lives can and must be. Overcoming death only makes sense if we believe in eternal life and the good, and if we are prepared to endure the fate of evil as well. Both will inevitably come to us, often unavoidable, ultimately inescapable. Death can only be overcome through life itself, as our great spiritual guide taught us. We can realize our potential only by acting in our lifetime in accordance with the example our Lord provided. Whether or not he possessed divine attributes is irrelevant, for when he came to earth, he was fully human, so that we could take him as our example. Christ within us, the key to transforming good and evil. The problem of theodicy need not be solved by us in the sense of Jesus Christ. It is enough to understand that he died for our sins and that his purpose was to help us achieve fulfillment in our lifetime. Holding this perspective enables us to accomplish everything humans are capable of, to recognize what is truly important in life at any given moment. This is the core teaching of the Christian essence, and Jesus Christ is the greatest of all avatars in this regard. No other earthly representation can influence the world to the same extent, or more effectively through our activation of creative power. We no longer need to distinguish between good and evil in a hostile world. Through Christ we are the first and best manifestation of all that is good, acting always in his example, and because we know that he is purely good, we refine ourselves through him. Philosophy around the good, noble and beautiful in the world begins to falter when every person eventually realizes that, in practice and daily life, they must compromise their ideals of good due to rational considerations. They must weigh which agreements with evil they are willing to make and at what cost. Christ within us does not take this path and makes no compromises. He embodies primordial goodness, the original archetype, the Urgott, recognized in Central Europe as the highest potential creative force. This force exists eternally within us. We merely need to discover and acknowledge it. Once we do, it no longer matters whether evil arises within us or in the surrounding world, even through natural laws. With Christ, we hold the key to transform everything, internally and externally, into good by following his perfect example. This does not mean succumbing to superstition or irrational belief. We act with full awareness that he can bring forth the miracle of good within us. By adhering uncompromisingly to his path, the path of all goodness, we achieve a transformation that would otherwise be nearly impossible without such a guide. The human, corporeal being is not naturally designed to follow the laws of goodness. Evolution has conditioned humans to materialism and pragmatism. The essence of humanity, conditioned by reinforcement and attenuation of actions, cannot escape this primordial principle of life unless one develops the crystal within, a power awakened through Christ's presence in us. This is the secret of the infinite, eternal creative power, and it distinguishes itself intentionally from mere fanatical or fatalistic superstition, something most people have yet to understand. Many assume that any form of Christ-centered belief must inevitably align with superstition, fanatism, or irrationality. They fail to see that this life path is fundamentally about expressing one's will. By fully committing the strength of one's body and mind to this potential, one develops the crystalline power of Christ within. To understand this is to hold the key. In maintaining Christ's power, one does not drift into fanatism, nor must one claim to act for the noble, valuable, and good on behalf of others. Rather, one becomes these qualities in the deepest fibers of the body and every thought of the mind. The Christ nature within, beyond philosophy and reason. The Christ nature within humans requires no philosophy, no theories, no philosophers, nor thinkers, and it needs neither priests nor learned academics. It requires only the pure heart and clear reason of those who wish to develop the potential of Christ within themselves. Those who know, feel, and perceive with their inner spiritual eye that only He, the supreme and greatest potential of the crystal of all goodness, humility, modesty, and effectiveness, can truly arise when actions are right. Everything is determined by this practice, not by the lofty and complex theories one constructs about evil. Therefore, when one develops the Christ nature within, one can simultaneously set aside all theories and philosophies, dismiss all mental constructs, and no longer deliberate over what is good or evil. Instead, heart, reason, intuition, Christ nature, personal power, and the creative force of the primordial principle become the sole motivators capable of producing the correct result. It is thus more important to listen to intuition than to rationality, to trust the power of the heart over logic, and to be guided by values, virtues, and morals rather than by evolutionary materialism and pragmatism. Evolution has certainly made us what we are today. It has raised our intelligence, sharpened our discernment, enhanced our bodies in the eternal competition among humans, equipped us with greater abilities, produced civilizations, fostered appreciation for beauty, strengthened and forged our will, and created increasingly sophisticated tools, both mentally and practically. Yet evolution alone has not succeeded in enabling us to understand the essence of the Christ nature, nor the level at which human spiritual development must occur from the simple pragmatic animal man to the highest potential of the spiritual human. The spiritual human not only yearns for goodness, peace, and the freedom of others, but understands that he alone can initiate and advance every further step in development. To do this, he must cultivate the Christ nature within himself. The role of Christ nature in leadership and the realization of good. The problem of theodicy is fundamental and will continue to be so, yet there are levels of understanding in which this question remains relevant. And there are levels in which it has been conclusively resolved and therefore no longer holds significance. It is precisely to these levels that humanity must advance, to grow spiritually, and to cultivate an impartiality toward people, the world, society, the environment, and creation. This allows one to perceive all layers of reality in such a way that one understands that theoretical questions are not ultimately resolved by theory itself, but by how far, to what extent, in what measure, and in what manner one practices the good that each of us, or at least most of us, can envision within ourselves. Although the good in many people can often only manifest as a form of pragmatism, each person is capable of performing only the good that their own faculties and inclinations allow. One must be content with this, as humans are never complete in their abilities and characteristics, and overcoming their evolutionary nature is the greatest challenge they must learn to face. Therefore, every individual should be given the opportunity to thrive within their potential and to effect as much good as possible in practice. Recognizing that not all people are equally capable, willing, or able to do good leads to a societal solution in which the best of the good are placed in positions of leadership. And the philosophy of equality for all will not suffice. Importantly, the less gifted cannot, by nature or understanding, comprehend the extraordinary abilities and qualities of the more developed, and are therefore prevented from perceiving reality and truth as it truly is. For this reason, the capable, gifted, and virtuous, those who have fully developed the Christ nature within themselves, must lead society by Christ's example. They must demonstrate that they can not only build a good society, but also assume the highest levels of leadership. On this level of perception, which relies on intuitive and visionary understanding of the good in humans, only a few can rise above their animalistic nature. The superhuman endowed with Christ nature can thus develop the true and authentic in themselves and for others so powerfully that they are able, through their inner avatar Christ, to occupy a wise leadership position in society and perform seemingly miraculous deeds. This nobility of Christ nature is not based on material or pragmatic foundations, but purely on the experience, knowledge, and wisdom that only this nobility understands what constitutes good leadership for humanity. Any other form of rulership or authority over people is destined to fail and cannot endure. Evil, according to this understanding, exists precisely where this inner Christ nature is incomplete and unable to bear fruit in the world. Thus, one must be wary of attempting to cultivate any leadership qualities other than those derived from Christ nature. One might try, relying solely on justice to guide decisions in life or society. Yet, inevitably, boundaries of values, virtues, and morals blur between good and evil, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish one from the other. This failure can only be avoided by allowing the highest potential of the primordial principle to take residence within, activating one's creative powers and discerning in practice what truly works and brings about good, and what falls into its opposite. The mystical path to the Christ nature beyond the problem of theodicy. The problem of theodicy is something that has not even reached the awareness of many believers. They do not understand, they see it as a danger to contemplate, and they do not wish to confront this contradiction, or they convince themselves that it might or even must harm their faith. Consequently, they let good speak solely through the Bible, where it has already been partially recognized and a guidance can be found. Yet this does not remove evil from the world, nor does it solve the questions raised by the problem of theodicy. To truly understand theodicy, its many theories and perspectives, one must first immerse oneself fully in its study. One must learn to comprehend the various viewpoints and confront what most believers lack the courage or understanding to face. Once this is accomplished, one can move into the next realm of achievement, a metaphysically based faith of will, where one gradually separates the wheat from the chaff. Here, by consciously rejecting the contradictions of theodicy, one can find a practical resolution to these conflicts and advance securely along this path, developing the Christ nature within oneself without the greatest internal contradictions. This may be the path of the few, the pure, the noble, and the good, but it is also the only path that can be walked along the golden way. A faith that is steadfast, unshakable, and has already overcome all obstacles and difficulties. This faith develops in such a way that it completes the human inwardly and transforms them through the power of Christ nature into a Christ being. Upon reaching this stage of mystical realization, external factors such as theories, philosophies, interpretations, ideas, academic views, or subtle analytic distinctions become entirely irrelevant and can be fully ignored. This is a point that all those who seek pure faith must eventually reach. It marks the moment when one can claim to have attained a faith reconciled with all potential contradictions, which have thereby dissolved. This is the point of mystical completion, where every contradiction can be fully resolved, and where faith is constructed on an entirely different level, the magical, mystical application of action through will. Once this stage of devotion is achieved, and every contradiction is resolved, the inner Christ nature exists in its fully transcendent form, enabling miracles previously thought impossible.